Julie, as I am too. Okay, let's see what we got, my friends. All righty. Beautiful, beautiful. Okay, so welcome everybody. I'm Dorothy Suskind. I'm an associate professor at Longwood University, where I teach classes primarily in literacy for elementary and secondary. And then I also direct our writing project, the Southside Virginia Writing Project. And I'm going to share just a couple things about the writing project so you kind of know where we come from and how you got here and all of that good stuff. So, first off, actually, last year we celebrated our 50th anniversary of the National Writing Project. The National Writing Project was started by a high school English teacher named James Gray, and it was really based on the principle that great teachers of writing actually write themselves, and that teachers should be the ones directing professional development in their districts. And he went on to found the Bay Area Writing Project at University of California, Berkeley. And now, if you can believe it, we have actually over 175 writing project sites across the country. We actually have 12 sites that are international now, which is super exciting. And every state has a writing project, and Virginia actually has seven. So we are very well represented. Presently, the National Writing Project collaborates with over 2,000 districts across the United States. And each year, on average, different sites like ours delivers about 80,000 hours of professional development. So just kind of think about that. Most research studies show that the National Writing Project is the oldest and one of the most successful forms of professional development. And in addition to working with teachers, is that projects work with youth as well. On average, serving about 35,000 kids a year through young author camps and writing contests and all kinds of retreats during the year. And one of the really cool things is the National Writing Project has a lot of support from lots of famous authors across the country, and I just pulled four of them, which I knew that you would recognize. And these authors give money, they give workshops, they do podcasts, so just lots of support. And up there on the right is Meg Medina, who hopefully a lot of you recognize because she, in addition to being a very well-known author, is a Virginia native. She actually lives in Henrico, which is pretty cool. And some of the really important things to know about the Southside Virginia Writing Project, which you're part of right now, and the National Writing Project, is just some of the principles that the projects are founded on. The first idea is that great teachers of writing write themselves, and that just seems like a super obvious thing. But what we know from research is that a lot of teachers of writing are kind of fearful to write themselves. And we know that when teachers write, it positively impacts their pedagogy. There's also the thought that are all teachers or teachers of writing? The writing project doesn't just serve English teachers or elementary school teachers. We have social studies teachers and science teachers and health and PE, the arts, the whole thing. The other piece that's so important is this belief that literacy and are kind of thinking about reading and writing does have a research base and pedagogy that can be taught and learned. And some of the ways we do this is each year we have a summer institute, which is actually going on right now, where local teachers come together. Sometimes it's in person and sometimes it's online to learn together. We learn to write together, we learn to read together, we look at the research, and then we also plan professional development that teachers then go back to their local schools and hopefully perform. In addition, we do young authors work and writing retreats and various PDs. And one of the really founding tenets of the National Writing Project is this idea of teacher as leader, and that teachers are positioned to be the best leaders in their school. And in the best case scenario, they're the ones doing that PD, not bringing in outside people. And some common terminology that we use in the writing project is when teachers first become involved with the writing project, we call them teaching fellows. And then once they really establish their craft, they're called teaching consultants. And that terminology, teaching fellows and teaching consultants, is something that's used across all writing projects. So if you were to leave our writing project and go out to Berkeley, California and say, I'm a teaching consultant, they would know exactly what that means and put you to work, hopefully doing some professional development. So today we have got one of those amazing teaching consultants doing professional development for us, Julie Arntson. She's going to be talking about, is this not the best title? Love connection, literary and informational texts that work together. And a little bit about Julie. She is the mom to three fabulous daughters. She has not one, but two master's and education degrees. She has taught so many different things. She's been a ninth grade ELA teacher, a peer tutoring program director, and a secondary instructional coach. In addition, continually to serve the educational community, she served on several VDOE SOL committees, and in her most recent position as a secondary instructional coach, she works with core curriculum teachers to model evidence-based strategy instruction in their classrooms. And in addition to working with teachers, she also works with students to ensure they can utilize their strategy instruction to support reading comprehension. And in her spare time, because that's got to take up most of your time, Julie, she loves reading and Target runs and knitting and watch a drama-filled reality TV shows. Me too, my friend. And with that, I'm going to stop sharing my screen so that I can hand it over to Julie to share yours. So let's do it, Julie. Welcome.
Thank you. Thank you for that intro. I appreciate that. And I think there we go. My computer is being a little tricky today, so give me a hot second to get this shared because I tried to split my screen and that was a no-go.
Yeah, it
Um,
happens. I have a hard time with that too.
it said it said we don't like it when you try to do this, so I'm trying to work around my split screen. So
Mm,
hopefully is my PowerPoint coming up okay? Okay, good.
looks
All right.
wonderful.
So thank you. And woot woot to Chesterfield. A little thing, I am transitioning out of my role as a coach in Petersburg, and I'm actually coming to Chesterfield in the fall, and I'm super excited. So I'm getting to try on a new role as a dean. So this is going to be fun. So I thank you again for that intro, and I'm going to talk today about making text sets, especially joining together that literary and that informational text and marrying them in the best possible way to make for a happy unit. So, and if there's anything where I'm going a little too fast, or because I have a tendency to talk very fast, or if there's anything where you want some clarification, please feel free to pop questions in the chat. I'll try to check it periodically, and or unmute, ask a question. I am totally open to that. Okay. So we're going to talk today about making our perfect match in the classroom. And I will preface this by saying I did come from a ninth grade classroom. This past year, I've worked all 9 through 12. So I've got units that hit all of those grade levels. I have a ninth grade unit that I worked on, an 11th grade unit that I worked on, and a 12th grade unit that I worked on as samples towards the end of this presentation, just to kind of give you a feel for what I've done. But this is kind of where I've lived for the past couple years, in working together with the community of other like-minded teaching individuals, where we get together and we talk about what are we teaching, how are we getting through to the kids, and what can we put in place for success. So we all know that the SOLs changed recently, and today we're going to be exploring DSRD, which is, one of my favorites. It goes right into our text sets, and it's talking about regularly engaging in reading a series of conceptually related texts. So they really are wanting us to focus on not just one text, one skill, one lesson, but building that knowledge for kids with different texts that have complexity levels and where they can work independently with peers or using modest support in the classroom. And we're really talking about building up their background knowledge to help them with that learning, to help them build that learning as they go. Okay. And this is my favorite meme because I make these faces quite frequently. And I start out with, wait a second, what is a text set and why do I need one? Because text sets and DSRD go hand in hand. Okay. When I'm talking about a text set, I'm looking at what VDOE has put out there as guidance, and I'm using that to formulate what I'm working on. Because I know in an English classroom, we are so used to saying, well, in my class, we read The Outsiders, and we have quizzes, and we have writing activities, and that's the novel that we use for this 9 weeks. But using text sets is a little bit deeper than that. So what we're talking about is taking the idea from the VDOE where we have a literary text and we're pairing it with informational text or other literary texts in order to get to that DSRD where we're building around one common theme or one common concept to help the kids get a deeper learning. So I pulled this directly from what VDOE is giving us guidance on, and it says teachers should create their own text-dependent questions and assignments, and they say literary text should be paired with informational text on the same topic or theme. They give some examples on the website where they talk about, where they have paired sets, but they only have, I think when the last time I looked, they had one set for 5th grade, one set for 8th grade, and one set for EOC. And that's all they gave us so far. I know that they're starting to put more resources online for us, but that is the only guidance they have given us so far. So with that idea, we are taking a text that we already have planning on, we're already planning on teaching it, we're already planning on utilizing it in our classroom, and we're looking at combining it with either other literary texts or with informational texts that are on a similar theme so we can hit that goal of the DSRD. Before we talk about that text set, and I will kind of go into what text sets look like, I do have some, again, that I used in my classroom or that I helped my team develop for their classrooms at the end of the show. But before we get into that, we do need to review something really quickly. We need to talk about qualitative and quantitative measures of a text, because that is really important. We are talking about building a text set around a text we're planning on using in a classroom. We also know that the VDOE wants us to constantly, they're always talking about let's increase the rigor, let's increase the rigor, let's increase the rigor. And to meet those new SOLs, we have to do that. But in order to do that, we have to talk about the qualitative and quantitative measures of a text. So I just pulled a smattering of texts. These are all novels, but how would you rank these novels? What criteria would you use to rank them or organize them in some way? You want to pop a suggestion in the chat or a comment in the chat or unmute? how would you rank these novels is my main question.
I might think about like the complexity of the storyline.
Okay, complexity of storyline. I see someone in the chat put by genre. These are all literary. So are we looking at subgenre? Okay, reading level. Are there ones that you would definitely pull for high school versus middle school versus elementary school? Is that how we're ranking them? Okay. All right, so let's take a look at qualitative and quantitative and break that down. And I'm going to pull this back up again in a moment. So we can measure a text, we can rank a text, both quantitatively and qualitatively. Okay. Quantitative means that we're looking at the lexile level. So we are looking at the word length, sentence length. We're looking at the frequency of unfamiliar vocabulary. We're looking at what grade level appropriateness the text has. Lexile ranges are fun because or I should say, lexiles are reported in ranges. And based on a lexile score, you can kind of determine if a text is going to be appropriate for a student to read. Okay. I pulled a range from Scholastic. There is some variation online when you look. I have been in districts that use Scholastic, the lexile measure. So I just pulled from Scholastic. So these are the ranges that they give for texts. They say that a third grader has a lexile range of 415 to 760, that a fifth grader has a range of 770 to 1080, an eighth grader has a range of 985 to 1295, and a 10th grader has a range of 1085 to 1400. Once you get into high school, there's minimal difference in the range. Most of the time, the kids that would come to me in ninth grade, if they were batting at 1,000 on a lexile measure, I was like, okay, we are within range. This is perfect. We're within grade range. And I believe the highest lexile goes to 1,600. But as they go through the years, they want you to expand on the students' beginning lexile at the beginning of the year. They want you to build vocabulary and help the child build lexile. And I pulled these grade ranges because third, fifth, eighth all have EOC rating SOLs. I also this year will have a third grader, a kid going into sixth grade, and a kid going into ninth grade. So these are ranges that I looked at for my own kids when they were coming through. But I just wanted to pull some random ranges to look at it. So let's look at those books again. We said that there are some books on here we would look at by genre. We might classify them by age appropriateness, and we might maybe look at their lexile range. Okay. Keep in mind, go back if I can, that when we're looking at a fifth grader is 770 to 1080. Oop, and it popped again forward, sorry. And when we're looking at a third grader, we're looking at 415 to 760. So there's a little bit of a gap there. And when we're looking at eighth grade, there's a little bit of an overlap from fifth grade to eighth grade, if you notice, because the high range of a fifth grade is 1080. Low range of eighth grade is 985. Okay. So keep that in mind as we look at these lexiles. So here are those novels again. Scarlet Letter is 1210. Sun is also a star. Personal favorite is 650. Roll of Thunder, Hear My Cry is 920. Night by Elie Wiesel, 590. The Mysterious Benedict Society, 900. Inheritance Games, one of my high schoolers' favorite books, 640. Legendborn, another one of her favorites, 730. Animal Farm, 1170. Hunger Games, 810. To Kill a Mockingbird, 790. ALBD, one of my absolute favorite books to teach in ninth grade, 750. And Harry Potter and the Deathly Hallows is a 1070. That's a wide range for some of these novels. Are there any based on a Lexile level that surprised you? Pull up the chat. Any that stick out as, oh my gosh? I don't think anyone's surprised by Scarlet Letter being as high as it is. But are there any that we know that we usually reach for in a high school classroom that you think, wait a second, why are we using this text? Night is way, way lower. So this is where we go into, there's the qualitative, so we can talk about the score, right? We can talk about that Lexile level. And I'm going to go back. Let's see if I can go back slides. Will it let me? Go back. Oh, it's going to make me do the animation. I'm sorry. But night at a 590, that means a third grader should be able to read it.
Yeah.
That's appropriate for a third grader. Anyone agree with that?
No.
Not at all. The content of that book, I had trouble with it as an adult. I mean, it's a tough book to read. But looking at these, they have such a wide range. And like I said, my daughter, who's about to go into ninth grade, one of her absolute favorite rereads of all time is Harry Potter. She also absolutely loved Inheritance Games and Legendborn. And those are way below her reading level, right? By the way, you might see my kids pass by in the background. I'm sorry. It's summer. They're home. So I love this meme. Any of those kind of shake your core. If you think about it, another one that I didn't include on here, Lemony Snicket, A Series of Unfortunate Events, clocks in at a 1010. And The Kite Runner, which is definitely not something I want my ninth grader reading because the content is way too adult for her, is an 840. And I know for a fact that the AP test at one point had passages from The Kite Runner on it. So an 840 Lexile passages made it to the AP exam. Lemony Snicket, which I would say is a third grade book for content. I think I wrote down it was, when I looked it up on Amazon, it was rated for 9 to 12-year-olds. And that is a 1010, which is the higher end of the Lexiles for that grade range, but also something that you would see commonly in a third or fifth grade classroom, okay? So this just means, I say all this to say, it's great to look at something like the Scarlet Letter and say, well, it's a 1210, it's appropriate for high school, right? But we can't just look at a book's Lexile score and determine that it's appropriate for kids. We have to think of the content, we have to think of the structure, we have to think of the knowledge demands, and we have to put all of that together. So we have to think of the qualitative stuff too, and not discount a book just because, well, Legendborn, which is about this thick, clocked in at what, 7, what was it? I don't want to go back a slide. Legendborn was a 730. The book is about 500 pages. I've had ninth graders that refuse to pick that book up because they say there's too much there. But you have to think of what's in the content and not just the score that it gets, okay? If you're ever curious about the Lexile of the books you're teaching, and I think you should look into them because I think it's an important piece of the puzzle, you can go to hub.lexile.com and it will give you the scores of those books so you can make a more informed decision for your classroom. So I put that together, and we need to start thinking of qualitative, okay? So quantitative is great to look at something and think like, okay, this is going to be, it's not going to be a stretch rigor-wise for my kids to read. we need to think of that qualitative measure when we think of the books that we are choosing for our classroom. And this also is where our text sets come in, because a lot of times informational texts will give us that push we need to hit the rigor. And if we pair them appropriately with the novels that we plan on teaching or with the books we plan on teaching, we can create unity and create something that's going to give us that complex structure, that's going to give us that vocabulary, that's going to help drive that background knowledge, that we're going to find things that really help the kids dig in, looking at purpose or subject matter. We can do that through an informational text and really build up a unit. When we look at, and I'll probably have time at the end of this if anyone has questions. When we look at literature, we're looking at not only the vocabulary, the text structure, the language features, we're also looking at meaning. We're looking at knowledge demands. What do the kids really need to know in order to comprehend what's being put in front of them? And another favorite that did not make the cut for this, there's a book, Everything Sad is Untrue, which is basically it's a very low level Lexile. I believe it ranked in the either upper 500s or lower 600s. But that book is a retelling in a way of 1001 Nights. So the kids who read it would need to understand symbolism, illusion. They need to understand that in order to comprehend what they're reading. Okay. So if we're looking to increase that rigor in our classrooms, what we suggest is creating a text set. So instead of just picking up Night and reading it and doing comprehension checks and asking questions of one text, I'm going to think about how can I take that one text that has a very low Lexile, but hits probably the exceedingly complex on almost everything else except for maybe the level of vocabulary, but the idea of the knowledge demands that kids would need to be able to understand that text. If I take just that novel, I can pair it with some informational texts that are going to help me increase that rigor and bring that unit to something that is exceedingly complex and is going to hit that rigor and hit those knowledge demands that we need to be successful on our DSRD. Okay. So get back to that's literature. There we go. So when I do the units, and this is my process when I'm looking at what I'm teaching, I say that backwards planning is your friend. I know in curriculum they give, oh, you have these options for texts, or they might just list the skills that you need to cover. Okay. So I always start with, if I'm looking at a 9-week unit, I might have to pull from the approved text list that we have to cover for 9th grade. It's kind of always the same thing: Romeo and Juliet, The Odyssey, To Kill a Mockingbird, the classic novels that we always teach, okay? But I also look at what skills am I trying to teach through that unit. Am I doing a unit where my kids have to look at word choice, vocabulary, and tone? Am I doing a informational text unit where my students have to evaluate an author's opinion? Am I looking at the students trying to figure out author's intent? Okay. I want to get beyond just, well, they can identify plot points, they can identify characterization. I need them to dig deeper. What skills am I trying to teach in this unit? And then I kind of plan backwards from there. I would take whatever I plan on teaching, and I would start the process of dissecting and looking for excerpts. So I would take a novel and decide what in here is the most important that I need my kids to read in order to get that skill. I'm going to show you one of my units where I think it's the first 3 chapters of the novel, and I broke it into excerpts that the students would read. So they'd read part of a chapter and then they would pair it with an informational text. Or they might read two, I might take one chapter and break it into two, and they get one excerpt on one day and then another excerpt the next day, and then they get an informational text after they read the two. But I break everything down, okay? Then I look at my text and I think, what themes are evident in here that I need to start looking for pairs? Is there, if I'm doing Romeo and Juliet, am I looking at that for maybe I could be looking at gang violence as a theme, or decision making, teen decision making. Okay. There are some great articles out there about how teenagers have not fully formed yet. And so we need to work on those soft skills so that they form good decision making habits. I might be looking at maybe throughout time different Romeo and Juliet couples that have existed or are possible. I know that in the 90s there was one about Romeo and Juliet being two teenagers living in, was it Sarajevo? Bosnia and Sarajevo. So I might look at that, like what couples have existed through time. If I'm looking at the Odyssey, am I looking at a theme of homecoming and what it means to come home? And am I then looking at what does that mean in other cultures? Maybe I'm going to pull from other cultures other than just Greek culture. What does that mean? Am I looking at a hero's journey? Am I going to go out there and think about what modern day heroes are there that I could pair with this text? So I start looking at themes and areas of interest. I might even pull my students to find out what is going on in the world that they're interested in. And maybe they're very much interested in um, immigration or journeys. And then what text can I pull to pair with that and give them that background knowledge? Okay. And I'm always looking about where can I dig in to a theme or topic of interest and help them expand that background knowledge. Then I'm going to go out and start, once I've picked out my excerpts from a novel or a text, then I'm going to start pulling from credible sources different informational articles that deal with theme. And I have a slide where I have some different suggestions. This is just my quick suggestion. There might be a subscription service that your district uses. There might be Newsella or Actively Learn or Common Lit. That might be what the district says, we need you to use this as a resource. And those are great. They have ways that you can identify things on, or different articles on theme, or different literary texts on theme. You could also use a trusted website if there's a news website. I think I have one coming up in my later slides where there's one that has scientific articles. So it's a great resource for searching for if you have a topic of, say, contagious disease, and you look up different different infections and you want the scientific aspect, you could look on there for vetted and verified scientific articles.
I'm doing good. Hey, I'm on a webinar. Can I call you right back?
Another great web source that I use.
Over about 2, so maybe around between 2 and 2:30. Thanks for calling. Bye-bye.
Another source that I absolutely love using is Kelly Gallagher. I use his article of the week. It's a little bit more of a dig on that one because you have to kind of go through and vet based on the titles of the articles and perhaps preview some of the articles to see if they really do match on topic and theme. So it's a little bit harder to match using Kelly Gallagher, but he always pulls from vetted news sources. He's never going to give you something that is, a crazy blog from someplace out in the internet. He's always going to pull from somewhere that's trusted, vetted, verified. So I do love using his website. Then I look at the excerpts that I have and the articles that I have, and I start determining how am I going to seam these together? Do I need to get the students through a couple of the excerpts of the novel that we're reading before I introduce the theme? Do I want to preview what the unit is going to be by giving them an informational text first that will give them some background knowledge, so that when they then read the excerpt, it gives them a little understanding, a little bit of a basis. I try to look at, where am I fitting these in? Okay. I do spread the love over the unit. I think you should pepper your informational texts throughout, so they're always reading something literary and then something informational. They're never having, 5 informational articles just at the end of the unit. I like to put it throughout. It does help them build that background knowledge, especially if you find any articles that help explain the theme or the concept that they are reading about. So if I am reading a text and my main character is experiencing something like, say, homelessness, and my kids are maybe have some understanding, but I found a great informational piece that's going to give them some more background knowledge and understanding on what that character is experiencing, I will make sure that I put it right next to that chapter where they read about like an experience that the character is having. So I try to pair them up and spread the love throughout the unit. I also, when I'm doing this, think about those skills that I really want them to develop. Again, we're always going back to skills. So are my students pulling things from the excerpts where they're going to have to talk about a theme? Are they pulling information from an excerpt where they're going to have to defend an opinion, which is so important in high school writing because we want them to do persuasive writing and argumentative writing? So am I going to have them pulling from those texts so that at the end of the unit, they can write an essay that has an opinion and develops it and backs it up with support? Or am I going to have various points throughout my unit where they're going to have to read and then sit and talk to one another? And I'm setting up for a Socratic seminar. So I always think about, how am I going to be piecing this together? I develop question sets for my students. And when I do that, I pull from a set of question frames, as I like to call it. And these are things that come directly from the SOL. We take the released questions on the SOL resources and use that as a frame. See if it'll pull up. Yay, it's going to pull up. So when I go through, if I find a passage where I have, let's see. If I have a passage where I need them to really build on making inferences, I pull the questions that deal with my students reading and making an inference. If I have a excerpt of a literary text and then an informational text, I might ask my students, what does the story show versus what does the informational text show? I might ask them to compare, what do both of these authors want me to get from this passage? Or I might ask them like what the selections are trying to express, what ideas are they trying to express? Okay. And these are directly from those released questions from the SOL. So we try to pull those types of questions. Again, when we increase that rigor, we want to go deeper. And then when I introduce the text sets to my students, once I figured out the placement of everything, I'm going to do 2 literary excerpts, and then I'm going to have an informational article that explains a concept that they just read about. And then I'm going to do another literary excerpt, and then I'm going to have another informational article. I start using the reading comprehension strategies with my students to make sure they really dive in deep and pull directly from that text so they make those connections. So I will show you, and this is another where I find my resources. There are some that are subscription based. I know that there are some that districts kind of guide teachers to using. For example, in Petersburg, we were guided towards using either Newsela or Common Lit. Those were the top 2 that they wanted us to use when we would create anything for curriculum. I know that there are some districts where they purchase Gale, which is a great great, what is it? It's a database, and it has opposing viewpoints, articles. That's great for if you find a topic or theme and you want to get two different viewpoints so students can compare and contrast what two authors believe about one topic. There is Nautilus. I have not used this one yet, but it is a science connected creative site. And then you can always fall back on using resources through the public library. I believe Chesterfield Public Library has access, if you have one of their cards, has access to Newsbank and Newsstream. So you can use your public library for resources as well. The idea is that I'm not just out there trying to find anything random. I'm using vetted, verified information from the internet that I can pull in and use with my students. When I talk about making text sets, I think I put this out of order. We as a collective group, and I know Dacia's in this webinar, and I know she led the last webinar, but we join forces as a group sometimes and share resources. And we've made text sets from a number of different novels. We shared at a Longwood text tasting. We shared some of our resources. So this is just to show you that these are the types of things we work on creating text sets from the text that we plan on using in classrooms. So if a middle school is using Stars Beneath Our Feet with a 650 Lexile, there's probably someone who has worked on, and I promised Suzanne that if anyone wanted information that we could talk, but I'm just showing you that someone has already pulled some excerpts to use, and they've already pulled some possible texts to pair with it. So we work together. No, why is it doing that? I clicked the wrong thing, sorry. So we pulled together some different text sets that we've used. And we always look at literature as a mirror where we're helping our students reflect on their own experiences, a window to give them a view into someone else's experience, or door. And when we get to that door, it's captivating them and helping them empathize with other characters' experiences. So when we do these text sets, we're really building around our students and what they're interested in and what we want to show them in the world. Okay. This is where I start getting into text sets that I've created. One of my absolute favorites, and if you take nothing else from this, take that I absolutely recommend this book. Like 10 out of 10 would recommend. Go to Amazon. It's I think it's like a $10 book, but it's an amazing book. I read The Starling House, and as I was reading it, I thought, one, this is amazing, and I need to bring it into my 11th grade classrooms. And I also thought, as I was reading it, this reminds me of Edgar Allan Poe. So I took 3 chapters of this book. There is a little bit of maybe some like edging on might be inappropriate later in the book. So I just took the first 3 chapters and I set up the first 3 chapters as excerpts. And I paired them with texts. I took the theme of, it's a book about a girl who is pretty poor and lives in a small town in Kentucky. And she walks by a haunted house every single day. And the house calls to her and it talks to her in dreams. And it's a little bit creepy. And eventually she goes to the house and has some interactions that are a little bit suspicious and dark and weird. And I was instantly intrigued. I said, what is going on here? So I pulled from that and I said, if I was going to go with a literary text to pair this is The Fall of the House of Usher. This is a modern day Fall of the House of Usher. It has that whole gothic, creepy element. It was the setting, the story building was beautiful. And it really helps the kids delve into how setting can affect a character and like how the setting affects a point of view. the language, the figurative language in this. There were so many sentences that I could pull from this and talk about how figurative language impacts the reader. So this was a great update to when my kids needed that push for the literary text elements so that they could do, better on their literary text elements on the SOL. And I could pair this with other Poe poetry. And then on the informational side, I pulled and talked about Kentucky coal towns and what happens when an economy collapses, what happens to the residents? Because you see that in the main character's journey. You see how living in a Kentucky coal town and being poor affects her. We also talked about author's purpose, because the author was telling a story about the type of town where she grew up. And that's great to dig into. Why did this author craft this text in this way? Okay. It's always fun to talk about Gothic horror too. It's so creepy. So when I was building the unit and I decided I was going to use the first 3 chapters, what I did was I pulled, this is the first chapter 1, and it's about half of the first chapter. And I just looked at it and it built that how setting affects the character so beautifully. And I pulled and created their first excerpt. And I wanted the students to look at it and I wanted them to think, like, we're reading a story, we're reading a literary text. Why are there footnotes? And those footnotes, if you read them in context with the actual text, those footnotes built that narrator's voice. And so we talked about how an author can build a character, how an author can kind of integrate voice into a text. Okay. Then we talked about to give them context, because this narrator is poor, lives in a hotel with her brother, works a part-time job at a tractor supply company, is barely making ends meet, eats ramen noodles every night. And we talked about, well, this is the type of town where she grew up, and how does a big industry like a coal economy, when that leaves, what happens to the people in that town? And so this was a great comparison for kids to get that background knowledge of what does it feel like to live in a town where the number one employer is a coal mine and jobs start disappearing. And so the kids had questions about, like, well, we live in a town where there's not many jobs, and we looked at, well, how does that affect people? And then when I asked them to compare, I would pull sections of the text and then ask them about the irony that the author uses in the paragraph, or the figurative language and how and why the author made that choice, or the vocabulary. Why did the author select this particular word? I absolutely love this text because I had the students, we built up to doing a Socratic seminar on this. And so the students had to come up with their own questions after reading a certain number of excerpts and a certain number of text pairings. And the kids thought that the guy that lived in the haunted house was a vampire. And I said, well, what gave you that impression? And they said, well, the way that he acts is kind of like Edward Cullen from Twilight. And I asked them, like, well, what did he do? And it was because the narrator cut her hand on an iron gate and started bleeding. And the male main character freaked out and said, oh, get away from here. Don't touch anything. And reacted so horribly to the blood. And they said, that's just like Edward Cullen. And I was like, okay, well, he's not a vampire. But it was a very interesting insight that what the kids pulled out of the text. I had a lot of fun with that particular Socratic seminar. So this, I didn't mean to hit that on my computer. This is one example of a type of unit that I would build, and this is just a sampling of the excerpts. I believe they read a total of, let me go back. I don't know if it'll let me go back. There we go. They read a total of, I believe, 6 excerpts. They read, which was 3 chapters broken up. They read 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 different informational texts. We talked about topics like what is a Gothic horror story? Like what does that type of literature look like? What are the landmarks of that type of literature? We talked about author's purpose. Oop, why does it keep doing that? Go back. Sorry. We looked at the Kentucky Coal Town, what it was like growing up in Kentucky, the children of a mountain town, and what was the article here? Children of the mountains struggle to survive and how that related to our character. We also looked at some literary pairings just to give them a little bit more of an understanding of that type of literature and to give them some comparison points. And then they had a Socratic seminar to discuss all of their findings. Another unit that I did, and this was a 12th grade unit, we talked about that song that was everywhere on TikTok, the Shabuzi, the bar song, pour me out another shot of whiskey, that song. Because it was interesting to think about how country music is evolving or changing over time and how there are more Black artists starting to, that there have always been Black artists in country music, but how they're becoming, how it's crossing the line and becoming not pop, but country music for artists like Beyonce and Shabuzi. And we looked at some articles about Shabuzi's bar song becoming an unexpected smash hit. We also looked at excerpts from the book Old Town Road, which was written about Lil Nas X's famous song Old Town Road. And when they looked at these excerpts, so we took some couple of the excerpts of chapters, and we looked at the language and how an author selects vocabulary and uses word choice to form tone, to form their opinion. And so you see in this one, we really hit vocabulary. And then for this one, students had conversations around questions that looked like this. Why did the author use an idiom and tone in paragraph 2? What would you have written instead? What other phrasing could that author have used? What would have been gained, lost, or changed with alternate phrasing, and how do you know? So they really had to dig into the excerpt and into the articles and talk about why the author chose the words that he or she chose and why they chose to express that to the audience. And then this one covered all of my 12 RVs, my 12 RIs for craft and style especially, looking at that meaning. Oop, I didn't mean to, there we go. And then we also talked about media messages, like what messages are we getting from media? And again, the students had, for this one, for my 12th graders, I believe they had to write a persuasive essay on an opinion about, oh goodness, I'm sorry, it's been a hot minute because we did this one unit at the very beginning of the year. I believe they had to form an opinion on the state of country music, or something to do with, like, it was something to do with country music. I'm sorry, I forgot what the actual writing was, but they had to use those texts to back up their opinions and their ideas. And then for my 9th grade, because of course 9th grade is about Romeo and Juliet, and we talked about how the sun is also a star, is kind of a modern day retelling of a Romeo and Juliet type story. This one was interesting too because if you've read this book, this one comes out, the chapters can be either quite long, depending on the narrator's perspective for the chapter, or it can be a short, like a one paragraph chapter. And I decided for this one not to pull starting on page one. I kind of skipped ahead and I looked at some of the further chapters in, and I selected the point of view in the text that I wanted to follow. So I decided we're only going to follow the male main character's point of view. And so I pulled specifically only the chapters with his point of view to make my excerpts. And then we talked about a number of different topics. We did compare it to Romeo and Juliet. We talked about love at first sight. Is love at first sight real? We did look into the real Romeo and Juliet couples. The one that they absolutely loved was, I think it's the Lovers of Valdaro, where the two skeletons are found in the same grave. They were very fascinated. They were like, "Is that really them?" I said, "Well, I don't know. What do you guys think? Can you prove it?" So we had to have them dig into a couple different articles on, was that the basis for the story? And we also, again, looked at the author's perspective, and we looked at a NPR interview of the author. And I also found some other grade level poems, short stories, and articles that kind of mixed in together with the themes and topics. That might be my last slide. I do have some time left. What questions do we have? I don't think I have looked at the chat recently. What questions do we have about building our text units? Can I start with that?
And folks, put it in the chat or just simply unmute yourself and ask.
Hi, Julie. Good afternoon. This is O.D. Phillips from Chesterfield County. How are you today?
I'm wonderful, thank you. How are you?
Well, I'm inside, so I'm staying out of the heat, so I'm happy for the moment. When you were talking about using excerpts from literary text, is that all you teach is the excerpt, or at some point do the kids read the entire text?
So that really depends. I do pull excerpts to get the kids interested and to keep our lessons focused. So when we did Starling House, I did say that towards the end, there is a bit of, I'm not going to say it's inappropriate language, but there is a interaction between the two main characters that I felt it wasn't my place to have them read that. So I just pulled the first three chapters and we used that as our springboard into comparing it to things like The Fall of the House of Usher, looking at the character's experience and pairing that with the informational texts on what happens in a poor Kentucky coal town or what's it like to grow up in Appalachia. And we kind of just did a section of that. When we did The Sun is Also a Star, the teacher that I paired with was insistent that we read the entirety of Romeo and Juliet. I've taught Romeo and Juliet for 15 years. I love Romeo and Juliet. I actually, when I was teaching, I would make my kids read Acts 1 through 3, and then I would summarize 4 and 5. But that was just me. I just cut off what I felt was okay, we can talk about this. Yes, she takes a potion. Yes, they both pretend they're dead. Yes, they both die, blah, 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 blah. But I really felt that it was important to focus in on what was happening on Acts 1 through 3 and talk about all of the wonderful things that happen in there. The teacher that I paired with read every single act of the play, every single word of the play. We mixed in, we made a giant 9-week unit. So as they were working on Romeo and Juliet, they were also reading an excerpt from The Sun is Also a Star. They were also reading informational texts. They were pulling everything together and talking about all of the moving parts. There is something to be said about reading an entire novel in the classroom. There's also something to be said about we need to make sure that we are pulling together pieces. So if there is something where I can take an excerpt and then pair it with that informational text and work on that skill, that's what I'm going to focus on.
Yeah, I like the idea of excerpts because we are in the TikTok age, and keeping these kids'
Yes.
attention is impossible or very close to it.
It's and that's exactly yes. So we are this is the hard thing for a literacy lover and an English teacher. Because do I want my kids to read the entire book? Absolutely yes, because I read it To Kill a Mockingbird. I named my middle child Harper Lee. That is her name. I love that book. Getting the kids to read it, if I were to approach it in a classroom, I would start at part 2. Part 1 is wonderful. It's all of that character building. It's all of that, how the setting affects the characters. It's all of that, coming of age story. Where's the meat? Part 2. So it's one of those things, again, windows, mirrors, doors. We can create a unit with excerpts where we're being purposeful about pairing together the really important parts of the text, the things that will help them build that background knowledge and insight, marry them together. If they are then inspired to pick up the book and finish it, fantastic. I love it. If in the sake of time we can't, we can still use what we have and make sure it counts. I do think the kids and I struggle with this because I do think we need to make sure the kids are reading something. I would argue that giving them that window and then having them say like, "But I thought we were going to read more. I really want to finish this." Well, here you go. Here's the book. I think we do fall into a trap too when we have a novel and we get the wonderful whatever comes packaged from the textbook company, all of the quizzes, all of the tests, all of the writing prompts. We fall into that trap of we're not going deeper, we're not building that background knowledge. So I would argue that making a text set is the best of both worlds. I'm going to still pull the things that I really love from the text, but I'm going to be adding to that experience by pulling something either literary or informational and marrying them together. I hope that answered.
It does. Thank you very much. Great presentation.
Thank you. Other questions? I can show the text tasting again. That's always the thing that everyone's the most interested in, right? Right, Dorothy? Suzanne would be like, yes, it's the thing that everyone's interested in. Because this is not just in my effort, there is a whole web of people across the area where we find these texts that we know are going to be those windows, mirrors, and doors. And we pull together and work together. Another one, my 10th graders absolutely loved Jackpot by Nick Stone. I think you can't go wrong with the Nick Stone novel. This was one of the ones where the kids were like, but I thought we were reading the rest of it. Here's a copy. So we pulled what we really wanted to work on with that unit. And I think I even paired this one because my students at the time, it was 10th grade, they were taking the work keys assessment. So it helped them. We pulled in some articles and some things on part-time jobs, office etiquette. We pulled that type of stuff in to help them then work on the work keys writing. My 9th graders absolutely loved Genesis Begins Again. This was another one where they're like, but I thought we were going to read more. So we always had copies on hand to pass out. And Finding Miracles, I actually got copies of this book in Spanish because I did have an ESL student who showed interest in reading more, but struggled in class. So I was able to find a copy of it in Espanol for my student. And I will say, I've always had the text on hand for those situations where a kid says, like, I like this. Can we keep going? Because that really is the hope. I did not create the unit on X by Elijah Shabazz. However, I used that this year. We did a week of exploring Emily Dickinson and then a week of exploring Malcolm X. And that really interested the kids. I have used The Immortal Life of Henrietta Lacks. That one, by the way, Immortal Life of Henrietta Lacks is a 1140. I've used that in my 11th grade classroom. I also used Hidden Figures. That's a popular one with our kids. That one ranks at a 1350 Lexile for the novel. And we talked about talked a lot about math with that one. That was not so much fun for me as an English person. I was like, this is math. There's a lot of science and math in that one. There was a lot of science in Immortal Life of Henrietta Lacks. That one is actually great to talk about, to have the kids come up with the opinion of, is it ethical to use someone's DNA samples, whatever? Is it ethical to use that if it's going to produce something for the common good of everyone without their knowledge or consent? And that had a lot of debate in the classroom. So that was an interesting one. Everything Sad is Untrue is on here. I can't recommend this book enough either. It's just beautifully written. And this one, oh, it is an 800 Lexile, but this one is beautifully written. This is the one that is 1001 Nights.
Mm-hmm.
So you have to have some knowledge of what those stories are about to kind of get that one.
Julie, have you had what are your thoughts about having the students contribute to the text sets?
Oh, absolutely. If you know that a unit is coming up and you want to pique their interest, get them involved. Have them find an informational article. Give them a topic. So if I was going to do Henrietta Lacks, I might ask them to look into an aspect of, like, find me an article where it talks about advances in cancer research. Find me an article where it talks about like, is it ethical to test like drugs or treatments on animals or humans? Like, have them explore. That's deeper diving, right? That is research. So have them pull. And the more you get them involved in things like that, the more you kind of know what your students are really into, the more you can build that unit around their interest, and then you keep their interest in the unit. I will say there was some grumbling when we did the Shabuzi unit. There were some kids that were like, "Oh man, this guy again," or I'm sick of reading about this guy. It's a song on TikTok." But when you look at the language, like when you look at how you can really get the kids to think about word choice in a new way, how you can get them to think about how are they using word choice to express their opinion. Is there anything in there that expresses a bias? So it's really interesting to get them talking. And then you can tell that our questions, we're not talking surface level. We're talking about how does it affect a reader's experience? Or what changes would you make and why? Primary sources. What primary sources does the author use? Why do you think they used these sources instead of writing or paraphrasing?
Julie, did you do it all like once you have gone through a text set to flip the script and have them actually try to write their own based on some of their mentor text?
Write their own. We write their own questions or
I
write
guess
a passage.
I was thinking more do their construct their own piece of original writing.
I Have not. We were on semester and
Got
our testing window fell really early. So I did not. That's actually a good idea. Because especially with something where they can really dig into the language, and I can't recommend Starling House enough. But yes, I have used mentor sentences, not maybe a full text, but I have used mentor sentences where I pull something from a text and then ask them to mimic the writing. So if it is a grammar lesson, we always pulled from the text to look at sentence construction, punctuation. We've also pulled to look at the type of figurative language and kind of getting into the meat of it. This one is just one of my absolute favorites. The narrator had to work 8 hours with Lacey Matthews, the human equivalent of unsalted butter. So we really talked about that. That would be a great mentor text to have. What does it mean to be the human equivalent of unsalted butter? What does that person have to do or say or be? What does that look like? But yes, I've used mentor sentences to teach grammar within the unit. Have I had them go out and write a poem about it? Not yet, but that would be something interesting to work into a unit. And to think of what else. Other questions? I haven't checked the chat.
I have another quick question. You mentioned as far as bringing song lyrics in, but have you experimented with other non-traditional text? So bringing in videos or different, or even guest speakers or different ways to build students' background knowledge?
We do. I did a unit on the Flint water crisis, so that's actually a good question. I should have added it to this. I had a unit on the Flint water crisis. I'm originally from Michigan. My husband is actually originally from Flint. He got out before the water crisis started. But I actually did when we had the all the boil advisories in Richmond and the water treatment stuff going on in Richmond. We actually, because the kids were we talked to the kids about that. And we did bring in Flint as a comparison. So we did actually use a mix in that one of informational text paired with informational text. We did use infographics. And we used the to pry strategy to analyze informational graphics because they had to look at charts, graphs, and pictorial information. And we also did use news clips, interviews with Flint residents, and the kids had to kind of put all of that together when they came together to talk about what does the government kind of owe its residents, right? Like what responsibility does the government have when they make a decision and then things negatively impact the community? So we had them talk around those issues. A lot of the things that we bring together are the text because we want them to delve in and use that skill for reading. But I have brought in clips or media before. I think I got my start with text sets with a clip from media, or a song. I used to pair, because part of when I was teaching ninth grade, part of our curriculum was everyone had to do a short story unit, and the short stories that we had to do were from the textbook. And the one that I used was The Necklace. And it was one of my favorite short stories to teach, but I paired that with the song Wings by Macklemore, the rapper, because it talks about the whole idea of you shouldn't really value things, you should value people. And so the kids had to do a comparison contrast of the short story and the theme, the lesson that was learned, and what is presented in other media. There questions? Anything that you want me to go back over?
Any other questions that you want to like unmute yourself or you can put in the chat? And Julie, if folks like have like questions come to them later, which is something that happens to me all the time, would it be okay if they reached out to you via email?
Absolutely. Yes. I'll actually put my email in the chat. I'll put my personal. Like I said, I am switching districts. So Julie
And
at
Julie, a couple people are asking if you could share your resources, if you'd be open to that.
So I am willing to share resources. I will caution that the idea when we came together as our group, sharing resources, the group that we like to create things together. One of the things I will say is if I am trying to motivate my team to dig in and do a tech set, I do that by having them help me create a tech set. And also I don't want to just give them something packaged because that feels like they don't have any buy-in to it. So when I do work on these things, like I said, with the teacher that wanted to do Romeo and Juliet, we came together and we talked about how could we work in a novel, how could we work in informational texts that kind of pair together perfectly and create this whole sphere of understanding for our kids. So I would say, yes, I am willing to share so that people can get an idea so that they can get a sample. I would then ask, would you join me in revising or working on it? Because I think that that helps create that buy-in.
And what I can do is, with Julie's permission, she can share with me her resources, then I can send them out to our email list. Does that sound good? Okay.
That sounds great. That sounds
Aw-
great.
Awesome, awesome. And then, Julie, you were putting in your, oh, great. You've got in
Yeah,
the
I put my personal email.
perfect. That's wonderful, wonderful. Well, great. Julie, any last words or words of wisdom that you want to leave people with?
I will just say this, it can feel like an undertaking when you start. It does feel like it's a lot of work to go out there and search for things and put it together. But it's one of those things where once you get the feel of it and once you get into ooh, this would be perfect, this is perfectly paired, oh, I love this, you really do come up with something. And then once you see the students experience it in a new way, it just kind of pays off and makes everything all the better. Like I said, my absolute favorite things are when the kids are like, but I thought we were going to read, I thought we were going to read more. Isn't there any more? So I will say it is ultimately it's worth it. You're putting in the effort to really help build that background knowledge for students, and it feels like you are giving them that window, that mirror, the door to see themselves, to experience those experiences. And it's a beautiful thing when it comes together. And I love collaborating, and I'm coming to Chesterfield. So if I happen upon any people in Chesterfield who are in here, I'm always willing to collaborate, even if it's not the same school. I love working together. So just let me know.
Well, thank you, Julie. That was fantastic. And I will do a follow-up with resources to everyone. And yes, thank you for joining us today. And I
All
hope you
right.
have a
Thank
great
you.
rest of the day. Keep cool.
All right. Thank you. Thank you everyone
Bye,
for joining.
everyone. All right, I'm gonna stop recording.
Okay.